Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is EJ Hilbert, and this is Practical CCPA. What the heck does that mean? It means, what do you really have to do if you were to be compliant with CCPA? For those of you who know me or follow me on LinkedIn, then you know some stuff about me. Those of you who don't, this is my background. There's some cool stuff on there. It's all true, every element of it. Currently, I work for a company called CNN LLP in Los Angeles. We have offices in San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, and also in New York. I run the cybersecurity practice and privacy services practice. But I've done work here in the US. I've done it over in Europe with Kroll. I've been with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've been with Gavin de Becker. I've been an FBI agent. I've done a lot of kind of cool, fun stuff. Um, I've been in this field almost 25 years. So we're going to go over the elements of CCPA as we go through this. And this will be one of several videos because I want to keep them short for each one of us to address. CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. It has to deal with rules related to whether or not you collect information about a consumer. Consumer is different than a customer, which I'll go over to in a few minutes. If your company makes more than $25 million in revenue in a year and does work with California consumers, then you must be CCPA compliant. If you collect more than 50,000 unique identifiers about systems, you have to be CCPA compliant. And you say, oh, 50,000, that's a lot. We're talking about IP addresses hitting your website. We're talking about connections from phones, computers, smart TVs, printers, whatever else may be connected. So 50,000 is not really that much. Or if you derive more than 50% of your revenue from selling people's data. And selling has a very unique definition in CCPA, which we'll cover as well. Kind of a compliance guidance here, and you probably can't see the penalties, so I'll have to cover those because my face is stuck in the way. But let me address a couple of things. First off, the question is, what data do you have? Why do you have it? Who has access to it? Where is it stored? And who did you share it with or sell it to? Now, the interesting elements about CCPA is what is personal information. For those of you who've been doing this for a long time, you probably think of personal information as PII. It's not, okay? Personal information gets rid of the identifiable information. And what I mean by that is under PII, it used to be name plus your name or somebody's name, plus a social security number, an address, a phone number, something of that nature. Personal information is not that. Personal information could be your name, it could be your address, it could be your social, it could be where you work, it could be the color of your hair, it could be your eye color, it could be what you purchased at a particular site, it could be a video of you walking by where we have no idea what your name is, but we have all kinds of details about you. This is personal information. Okay, it is not the same as under GDPR, the General Data Protection Act, General Data Protection Rights Act out of Europe, because that limits personal information to other elements. So don't try to combine the two. Don't rely on a lawyer that says, oh, if you're GDPR, you're CCPA. No, you're not. Pure and simple. A consumer is any California resident to include customers, clients, vendors, employees, and applicants. CCPA is primarily dealing with whether or not you deal with consumers like in a purchasing environment or they're checking out your sites. And the rules for that were as of January of 2020. But when we're talking about your employees, your applicants for jobs, your vendors, your business to business relationships, those start taking place in January of 2021. So don't think that just because you don't sell a product to various different groups doesn't mean that you do not need to be CCPA compliant, because you have employees, you have applicants for your jobs, you have vendors. All of that fits into this. What is the most significant about CCPA, and the reason, if you get nothing else out of this whole conversation, the reason CCPA is the most significant is because it is the first and only law that impacts most US companies, and it actually has a penalty. It actually tells you exactly what it is it will cost you if you screw this up. All right? And like I said, you probably can't read the penalty section because my face is in the way, and I don't know if I can move my face. But CCPA has a penalty of $2,500 for each violation. That's each person whose information gets stolen or lost during a breach, at a minimum, if the California Attorney General decides to go after you. up to $7,500 for each person's information that is lost. Okay? It also has this thing called a private right of action, which allows consumers to sue you because you screwed up, or maybe you didn't screw up, but your information got lost or stolen anyways. And it starts at $100 and goes up to $750 per personal data set that has been taken. What I mean by this is if you lose 1,000,000 records, like a Facebook loss or something of that nature, the minimum penalty is $100 million. Okay? This is a real penalty. It is a real thing. It is the first time that we have a cybersecurity related law that actually has a penalty in it. And the reason I say it's a cybersecurity related law is because though this falls under privacy, the only way those penalties come into play is if you suffer a breach. Now, right now, you suffer a breach, you notify everybody, you tell them, oh, we suffered a breach, we're bad people, blah, 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 and we're going to give you free credit monitoring. Well, that was great. Now you have to say, we suffered a breach, we lost your information. Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you $100 a piece or $750 a piece. There's no way around it. That's the way the law works. Okay? It is something that you absolutely have to be aware of. And yeah, there's insurances and things of that nature that come into play, but the penalties are real and they go into effect in July of 2020. And even worse, they go back 1 full year. So with all this said, let me explain something. This is not simply a bunch of laws that you write down, a bunch of policies and procedures. You put up a new privacy policy and ooh, you're covered. You have to do stuff. You actually have to have your company set up to do stuff. These are the key elements of the law. I'm not going to read through them. You have the capability of reading them. You have the capability of looking them up. What's important here is that CCPA took effect on January 1, 2020. All right. It allows for consumers to request a disclosure of the data categories that you have collected about them. It also allows them to request all of the data you collected about them. Now, a lot of people are freaking out about, oh my God, it's the deletion requirement that's going to freak me out and so on. There are 9 exemptions as to why you do not need to delete the data, but you need to be able to explain why you don't need to delete the data. Okay, so deletion should be the least of your concerns at this point. The biggest concern you should have right now is determining what data you actually have. Can you get your hands on it, and can you give it back to people? There's also rules in here about how you deal with children. There's rules about how you have to maintain it. There's also rules about the fact that, let's say I do come in and say, hey, I don't want you keeping my data anymore. I don't want you selling my data anymore. I don't want you doing any of that type of stuff. You can't discriminate against me for that. You can't give me lesser service because of it, with one exception. If your whole business is about selling data, if your whole business is about dealing with it this way, then yeah, guess what? If you decide to say, I don't want you to sell my data, then you can't do your job, you can't use the site, and you let people know that. End of story on that. But read through this. This is the formalized stuff. This is the actual obligation pieces that come into play. And remember, the regulatory action begins on July 1, 2020. I can tell you there are already multiple lawsuits having been filed. The Attorney General of the state of California is already looking to make a name for themselves. And if you think in the time of coronavirus they won't do this, you're wrong. Because as we go to this online environment, work from home approach, which I'm doing right here, if you listen real careful, you can hear my kids in the background. What is going to happen is privacy is going to become even more important. We're not going to sacrifice our privacy for these elements, all right? And yes, health information is included in CCPA requirements. So talking about somebody having the virus or things of that nature come into play. If you break it down, there are 7 key areas within CCPA that you must address. And I will cover each one of these separately in a separate video to keep it minimum because I want to, like I said, I want to keep these short. First off, data management. What do you have? Where do you have it? And why do you have it? That's very important. 99% of companies have no idea what data they have. All right? They don't know where it's located. Is it stored on a server? Is it stored on somebody's laptop? Is it stored in some remote drive? Is it stored in backup in paper format? What data do you have and why? Second one, vendor management. CCPA breaks vendors down into 2 groups. You either have third parties or you have service providers. A service provider is somebody who can only do the work that you've contracted them to do with the data. I give you the data, you do what it is I want you to do, and that's it. A third party, however, has the right to use the data as they choose afterwards. They have the right to take that data and utilize it their own way. And for those of you who go, well, I don't sell data or I don't do anything like that or don't have any third parties, read your contracts. I guarantee you have contracts that say that they have the right to use that data. So under vendor management, you're going to have to do things like, I don't know, change your contracts. You're going to have to create a data privacy addendum. Again, we'll cover that later in a third video. Do you sell? Sell means sell, share, trade, profit in any way. Do you get anything for the data? Do you give it to anybody else? Do you give it to any third parties? If you do, you have to disclose that. It has to be done. Your request fulfillment process. When you update your website, when you put all the stuff in there that you need to do, you have to have a process on the back end to receive those. You have to have the capability to receive emails in, receive requests in, focus through them or work through them, respond within 24 to 48 hours to say, yes, in fact, we have received this, and then fulfill the request within 45 days, okay, if it's a valid request. So you have to have people in place. You have to have a team in place. For those companies who have ever dealt with a subpoena, this is kind of like a subpoena processing situation. You get a subpoena in, you look to determine whether or not what you can do with it. You look to see whether or not it's valid. Same type of thing here. So maybe this goes into legal. Website updates. Your website needs to be updated. It must include a new privacy policy. It must include elements or language for CCPA compliance. It must include links on all the pages where you collect information about individuals, all right, about do not sell. You must have a do not sell button, all right? You must have a link that says CCPA request so they can click on it. It takes them to another page. They fill out the request and go from there. And you must have the back end in order to do that. That's what we call consent management, where the user consents to having certain elements utilized, like go ahead and sell my data, or don't sell my data, or things like cookies or other tracking elements. One piece of advice at this point, if you are updating your website, which by the way should have been updated by January 1 of 2020, so those of you still working on it, that would be your number one focus. Put everything else on hold and get your website up to date. But if you are updating your website and you're worried about consent management, do not link CCPA with your spam, your unsubscribe, your cookie stuff. Keep CCPA separate, all right? Make it a separate element. Give it a separate web page with a separate email address that puts all this stuff together. The reason? It will all start jumbling together, and you'll go from having one or two CCPA requests to like 1,600, which is what one of my clients has, and you spend all this time going through them to only find out, of course, that you only had one or two. So don't do that. Next thing on the list is training. You have to train your staff on the limitations of data use based on the collection permissions. Why did you collect it? If you collected it for marketing, you can use it for marketing. If you collected it to sell them a product, you can't use it for marketing unless it's in your website, it's in your policy. All right? And finally, and probably the most important thing, the foundation of this is reasonable security. You must prove that you have reasonable security. What does reasonable security mean? Nobody knows. We've got the ISO standard. We've got the NIST standard. We got all this other stuff. So basically, California Attorney General went with the CIS-CSC. That's the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls Top 20, which I'll show you in just a minute. Okay? You must be able to demonstrate that you do all the things that are on there. This is the difference between a $100 fine and a $750 fine, or a $2,250 fine and a $7,500 fine, all right, per person. So it's very important that you look at this, all right? For those of you who have no security strategy and you throw a bunch of stuff at it, I can send you the spreadsheet to download on this, and you can do a self-assessment. You can get in touch with me if you want to do that. We can work with you on that. We can help you with that. But this is where you need to focus, number 2, all right? All those other things come into play. Now, one thing that you have to pay attention to here, if you notice this list, only a couple of them are for your legal department, all right? Your legal department is going to help you write your privacy policy, absolutely. Okay, your legal department's going to help you do your vendor management, at least in terms of reviewing the contracts and creating a data privacy addendum. They're not going to do your data management. That's going to be your engineering department. You're going to have to do a data discovery. Either you're going to send out notes to everybody, you're going to use a tool that indexes all your data, and you're going to run queries against it. You have to do that. So there's engineering, maybe IT, whatever you want to do. You've got legal involved in here. You've got vendor management. That's probably going to be somebody within your finance department in terms of identifying who your vendors are. Your do not sell, that's going to be each business unit. They're going to have to determine what they do, how they share the data. Your request fulfillment process. I don't know who's going to do that. Do you have a trust and safety group? Do you have a security group? Do you have a compliance group? They're going to do that. Your website update, probably marketing. They're probably the ones who run your website, so you're going to have to work with them on that. Your training, that's going to be HR. You're going to have them put this all together. And then, of course, you have IT security that's going to come across the board. Point is, this is not something that you can buy in a box. This is not a one-size-fits-all answer. This is not give it to one person and they're going to work it all the way through. It's going to require a whole business approach. And yes, there are lots of questions to this. Okay, I'm sorry, there's problems because the law was written in about 5 days, whereas GDPR, I was sent to Europe in 2012 to work with companies to help deal with GDPR as it was coming into play because it was supposed to be passed in 2014. It didn't get passed until 2018. All right, they took over 5 years to put it all together. We in California decided to do this in a couple of days because we didn't like the idea that it would be a ballot measure, and instead our legislature decided to pass a law. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't come up with it. I'm just telling you these are the things that it includes. And let me share this last thing because I'm running low on time here. These things will not change. All right. You are going to have to do data management. You're going to have to do vendor management. You're going to have to determine whether or not you sell. You're going to have a process in place. You're going to have to update the website. You're going to have to train your people, and you're going to have security. So all the other elements of the laws and the minutia that the lawyers will work through, fine. Let them sort that. But you need this if your company's not going to suffer the liability of CCPA. Reasonable security. These are the 20 elements under the CIS CSC. All right? You can read them. You can look through them. You can go, do we have them? You can send them to senior management and ask, do we have them? You can be your internal auditors and do it. You can look it up online. CIS is loving the attention they're getting out of this. Absolutely. I have a spreadsheet that breaks this down, and it compares it up with NIST, and it compares it up with ISO, and it compares it up with all the other various different elements out there if you want to do that. My point is, you need this. You need your website up, and you need this. To wrap it up, the next video I will produce, and give me a couple of days, will be a deep dive into data management. What do you actually have to do? Where is it located? Things of that nature. It'll be a shorter video, like 10 minutes max. All right. In the interim, if you've got questions, there's my email address. If you spam me, I will shut you off and block you out. But if you have legitimate questions or you need help, here you go. I am not doing this as a marketing thing. I'm not doing this to sell you anything. This is straight information. I gladly offer you this up for free. I gladly give you insight for free. If you want to call me up or email me, fine. If you do really need help, we'll set something up. We're reasonable. We'll work it out. Okay. For those of you outside of the LA, California area, we can still do the work. Well, all work is going to be remote at this point in time, so we'll go from there. So I'm coming short. I've got a minute left in my 20 minutes for the initial one, so I will end it this way. CCPA is a game changer for the world in terms of data privacy because it actually has penalties. People actually have to do it. And those of you who want to wait and self-insure and worry about it and wait and see what ends up happening, know this. New York has a similar law, and they're just waiting to see how the courts work it out. California has their law, Nevada has their law, Washington has their law, Maine has their law, Ohio has their law. It's not just a California thing. This will be nationwide, and it's not going to be federal. Every state is going to take their own shot at it. So get on top of it now. I'll see you next time. Hopefully this was understandable and enjoyable, and you learned something from it. If you got questions, hit me up on LinkedIn or email me. Thank you very much.